She was 31 years old, sleeping on a friend's couch, and the only thing she owned outright was a 12-year-old hatchback with a cracked rear window. When the lawyer called to tell her that Dolores Marsh had left her a cabin on the eastern shore of Heron Lake, Nora Calloway sat very still for a long time. She didn't cry. She just looked at the water stain on the ceiling of Becca's spare room and thought about the last thing her godmother had ever said to her. She'd said it quietly, almost to herself, the way she always said the things that mattered most. She'd said, "Some things only show themselves when the time is right." Nora hadn't understood it then. She would. Before we go any further, if you're the kind of person who finds yourself in stories like this one, who knows what it is to start over with very little and very few people in your corner, we'd love for you to subscribe to this channel. It doesn't cost anything. And if you feel like it, drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from tonight. We read every single one. Nora had grown up in a small city in upstate New York, in a house that smelled like cinnamon and old newspapers, raised by a mother who worked 2 jobs and a father who was present the way furniture is present, occupying space without adding warmth. Dolores Marsh was her mother's oldest friend, a woman who had never married, who kept 2 cats and a vegetable garden and a standing order at the local library for any book about birds. She had been Nora's godmother since Nora was 4 days old, and she was the only adult in Nora's childhood who ever asked her a real question and then waited for the real answer. They used to spend 2 weeks every August at the cabin on Heron Lake. Dolores had owned it since the early 1970s, bought for $11,000 from a man who was moving his family to Arizona and wanted to sell quickly. It was small, 800 square feet on a good day, with a screened porch that looked out over the water and a loft bedroom that got unbearably hot in July. There was no dishwasher. The shower ran cold for 3 full minutes before it warmed. The dock had a board that wobbled third from the end, and Dolores always stepped over it without looking, because she had stepped over it for 30 years, and her feet knew where it was. Those 2 weeks, every August, were the best 2 weeks of Nora's year, from age 6 to age 17. They paddled a canoe to the far end of the lake where the herons stood in the shallows like gray priests. They ate sweet corn from a farm stand 2 miles down the road, standing over the sink and not bothering with plates. Dolores taught her to identify birds by their calls before she could see them: the wood thrush, the red-winged blackbird, the kingfisher with its rattling cry over the water. And every morning, without fail, Dolores made 2 mugs of coffee and left one on the porch railing before Nora was awake. Just sitting there, waiting. Nora's mother died when Nora was 22, and after the funeral her father sat her down at the kitchen table and told her, without particular cruelty and without particular warmth, that he was selling the house and moving to Florida with a woman named Sandra, who Nora had met exactly twice. He gave Nora a check for $4,000, her share of what was left after debts, and that was that. Dolores drove 4 hours to be at Nora's mother's funeral. Her father was there too, of course, but he spent most of the reception talking to people Nora didn't recognize, and he did not once put his arm around her shoulder or ask how she was doing. The following 9 years were not catastrophic. Nora was not a dramatic person, and her life did not collapse in any single spectacular way. It simply narrowed, gradually, the way a path narrows when no one tends to it. She had a degree in landscape architecture she had never fully used. She worked for a mid-sized property management company doing maintenance scheduling and site visits, and it paid enough to cover her rent in a 1-bedroom apartment with thin walls and a parking lot view. She had a relationship that lasted 4 years and ended without a fight. Just a long, quiet fading. Two people who had stopped being curious about each other. She had friends she liked, but rarely saw. She called Dolores every Sunday. Then, 18 months before the lawyer's call, Nora's company was acquired. Her position was eliminated. She was given a severance package, 6 weeks of pay and a handshake, and she spent the next 14 months sending applications into what felt like empty space, doing occasional freelance work, and slowly spending down her savings. By the time she moved onto Becca's couch, she had $412 in her checking account and a car with 208,000 miles on it. She was not without hope. But she was tired. The lawyer's name was Gerald Fitch, and he had a kind voice and no unnecessary words. He told her that Dolores had passed away 6 weeks earlier, quietly, in her own home, from a heart attack that her doctor said she likely hadn't felt coming. She had updated her will 14 months before her death. The cabin on Heron Lake and the quarter-acre lot it sat on now belonged to Nora Calloway, free and clear. He told her there was no mortgage. He told her the property taxes were current through the end of the year. Nora's first phone call after she hung up with Gerald Fitch was to Becca. Her second was to her cousin Marcus, who was 3 years older than her and lived in Raleigh and was the closest thing she had to a sibling. Marcus listened carefully and then said what Nora had expected him to say, that she should sell it, that the money would set her up, that an old Lakeside property was probably worth something even if it needed work. He said it gently, because he meant well, but he said it the way people say things when they have not been to a place and do not understand what it holds. She did not argue with him. She thanked him. And then she started packing the hatchback. She drove north on a Tuesday in November, which is not the time of year most people choose to drive to a lakeside cabin in upstate New York. The sky was the particular shade of white that means weather is coming. The trees along Route 9 had lost most of their leaves, and the ones that remained were the color of old rust. She had her sleeping bag, her 2 suitcases, a box of kitchen things from Becca's place, and a paper bag with 8 oranges and a jar of peanut butter. She had done the math. She had enough to live on for 60 days if she was careful. That was the length of her plan, 60 days. She almost didn't stop at the gas station in the village of Millhaven, 4 miles from the lake. But the hatchback needed fuel and she needed coffee, and when she pulled up, she was met by a woman named Ruth Engler, who ran the register, and who recognized the name Calloway immediately. Ruth had known Dolores for 22 years. She was a small woman with silver hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and when she found out who Nora was, she came out from behind the counter and took both of Nora's hands in hers. "Oh, we missed her," Ruth said. "We missed her terribly. Are you? Are you going up to the cabin?" "I am." Ruth looked at her for a moment. "Do you need anything?" It was such a simple question. Nora hadn't heard it in a while. "I'm all right," Nora said. "Thank you." Ruth let her go, but pressed a paper bag into her hands, 2 sandwiches from the deli case, and a piece of apple cake wrapped in wax paper. "She used to bring things in to me," Ruth said, "from her garden, every summer without fail. You take care." Nora put the bag on the passenger seat and drove the last 4 miles to the lake. The cabin was worse than she'd remembered, and she had not remembered it as good. The porch screen had torn away from its frame in 2 places and curled back on itself. The exterior boards, which had been white once, were now the grayish beige of old ash, streaked with dark lines of mildew. One of the front steps had broken through the center, leaving a gap wide enough to put your boot through. The dock was intact. She walked out to check, though the third board wobbled the same as always, and she stepped over it without thinking and the memory of Dolores doing the same thing hit her so suddenly she had to stand there for a minute with her hand on the railing, looking out at the gray November water. Inside was better and worse in different ways. The furniture was all still there: the plaid couch, the wood stove, the kitchen table with its 4 mismatched chairs, the bookshelf that ran the full length of the east wall. Everything was dusty and cold and smelled of old wood and the particular closed-in mustiness of a house that has not been aired since summer. But it was solid. The floors were solid. The walls were solid. There were 3 small spots of water damage on the ceiling. She could see the staining, but the roof had not given way. The wood stove drew when she tested it with a piece of newspaper. The water pump ran after a minute of coughing protest. She put her sleeping bag on the plaid couch and set the oranges on the kitchen table and ate one of Ruth's sandwiches and listened to the lake. She slept better that night than she had in months. It was on the 4th morning that she found the loose board. She had been sweeping methodically, working her way from the east wall toward the kitchen, and the broom caught on something near the wood stove, a soft spot where the edge of a board had lifted slightly from its neighbor. She crouched and pressed it with her hand. It gave. Not the give of rot, which is soft and crumbling, but the give of something that had been made to move and had moved many times before. She used the flat end of the broom handle to work it loose, and the board came up cleanly, hinged on nothing, simply resting in its groove. Beneath it was a space about the size of a large shoebox, a deliberate cutout, framed neatly in old 2x4s. Inside it was a metal tin with a red lid, the kind that once held Danish butter cookies, and inside the tin was a piece of paper, folded 4 times, with Nora's name written on the outside in Dolores's hand. She sat down on the floor. She did not open it right away. If this is the kind of story that stays with you, and we have a feeling it might, we hope you'll subscribe before we go any further. And if you're coming back to this channel for the first time in a while, welcome back. We're glad you're here. The note inside was dated 14 months earlier, which meant Dolores had written it not long after she updated her will. Nora read it twice before she fully understood it, and then she sat with it in her lap for a long time. It said, in Dolores's careful, old-fashioned cursive, "I have been putting things away for you for a very long time, little bird. Not because I thought you couldn't manage. Because I thought you might need a soft place to land when the time came. Some things only show themselves when the time is right. Look underneath. Love, Dolores." The tin itself held 3 things: a photograph, Nora at age 8, standing at the end of the dock with her arms stretched out, laughing midsummer, a small brass key on a length of red ribbon, and a handwritten list of numbers. 4 rows, 8 numbers each. Bank account numbers, she realized. 4 different accounts. She sat very still with those numbers in her hand. The next morning she drove back to Millhaven and found the branch of the regional bank that Dolores had used for 40 years. The manager, a man named Dale, who wore a cardigan and smelled like good coffee, confirmed everything without theatrics. Dolores had opened 4 savings accounts over the course of 31 years. She had set Nora as the sole beneficiary of all 4. They had been accruing interest quietly, undisturbed, the way water accrues behind a dam. Dale pushed a single sheet of paper across the desk, with a combined total at the bottom. Nora read the number twice. She asked Dale to read it aloud, because she wanted to hear it. He did. She thanked him. She drove back to the cabin. She sat on the porch in the cold November air and looked out at the lake for a very long time. The amount was enough to restore the cabin completely, with money left to live on for years. But it was not what made her cry. What made her cry was the photograph. Nora at 8, arms wide, laughing. Dolores had kept it in the tin for 31 years, since Nora was born, or close enough to it. She had been putting things away from the very beginning. The small brass key opened a safe deposit box at the same bank. Inside the box was a bird-watching journal, Dolores's, spanning 40 years of entries, and beneath it, tied with a rubber band, was every letter Nora had ever written her from summer camp, from college, from her 20s. Every letter. Kept. In order. Nora borrowed Dale's stapler and a legal pad and began making a list of what the cabin needed. She started with the porch. A man named Carl Wirtz did the carpentry. He was 73 years old, had a white beard and a truck that predated Nora by 15 years, and he had repaired that same porch screen twice before. Once for the man who owned the cabin before Dolores, and once for Dolores herself in 2009. He remembered Dolores clearly. He said she used to pay him in cash and always added $15 on top of whatever they agreed on, without explanation, without fanfare. Just tucked the extra bills under the coffee cup she'd leave him on the porch railing. She'd leave it out there before I arrived, he said, setting his coffee mug down on the kitchen table. Every time. Never saw her do it. It was just there. Nora said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Waiting." "That's right," Carl said. He looked at her. "You knew her well." "I did." The work went through December and into January. Carl brought his son-in-law for the bigger jobs, a young man named Pete, who didn't say much, but worked with the focused intensity of someone who took genuine satisfaction in doing a thing correctly. They replaced the broken steps, resealed the exterior, repaired the roof's 3 problem areas, reglazed the windows. An electrician Nora found through Ruth upgraded the wiring. A plumber replaced the ancient water heater and fixed a slow leak under the kitchen sink that had gone unnoticed for years. The town revealed itself to Nora gradually, the way winter landscapes reveal themselves, slowly, in detail, once you have stopped expecting the colors of another season. She learned which diner had good coffee and which had better eggs. She learned that Ruth Engler was on the town council and that the February meeting was open to the public and that they discussed things like the condition of the boat launch and the proposed new speed limit on the lake road. She attended the February meeting, mostly to listen, and sat near the back in a folding chair and drank bad coffee from a styrofoam cup and recognized in herself, with mild surprise, that she was not unhappy. She called Marcus in early December to tell him about the accounts. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She saved that for you for 31 years?" 40, I think, from before I was born. Another silence. "Nora," he said, "I'm sorry I told you to sell. I know. It was a reasonable thing to say. It really wasn't." She laughed. It was the first time she had laughed out loud since she'd arrived. There was one morning in late January when the temperature dropped to 7 degrees and the surface of the lake froze clear enough that she could stand at the end of the dock and see straight down to the bottom, the stones, the dark silt, the ghost-gray shape of a submerged log. She stood there for a long time with her hands in her pockets. Then she went inside and made 2 cups of coffee and left one on the porch railing. Nobody would drink it. That wasn't the point. Her father sent an email in March. He'd heard from Marcus. He didn't ask for anything, exactly, just remarked on what a generous woman Dolores had been and said he hoped the cabin was coming along well, and signed it with his first name and a period. Nora read the email once. She wrote back 2 sentences. The cabin is coming along well, and she hoped he and Sandra were doing all right. Then she closed her laptop and went back to helping Carl hang the new porch screen. That was all there was to that. By April, the cabin was finished. Not finished as in new, it was still 800 square feet with a loft that got warm in the afternoons and a third dock board that wobbled and probably always would. But it was clean, sound, warm in the evenings. The wood stove worked beautifully. The screens held. The dock had been sanded and sealed and a new light mounted at the end of it so you could walk out safely after dark. Nora had repainted the exterior herself, the same white it had always been, and it stood against the tree line as if it had always been exactly that white, in exactly that place, which of course it had. She built a raised bed garden on the south side of the house, in the spot where she remembered Dolores had always talked about putting one, but never gotten around to. She ordered seeds from a catalog, tomatoes, lettuces, snap peas, a dozen varieties of herbs, and she planted them in April and watched them come up through May with the vigilant satisfaction of someone tending something that intends to live. Ruth came out to see the finished porch one afternoon in late April, and Nora made coffee and left a mug on the railing before Ruth arrived, because old habits, or rather new ones built from old love, take hold quickly. Ruth stood at the railing with her mug and looked out at the water. "She'd be pleased," she said. "I think so. She worried about you. Not in a worried way, in the way she worried about everything she loved. Practically, what will happen to it? Is it going to be all right?" Nora was quiet for a moment. The lake was the pale early green of April light. 2 ducks were moving along the far bank. "It's going to be all right," she said. She filed her landscape architecture credentials for renewal that spring. She was offered a part-time consulting contract by a property developer who was restoring a lakeside resort 16 miles north, and she accepted it. She began to sketch a design for the stretch of shoreline behind the cabin, native plantings, a path to the water, a small bench. Something useful. Something that asked nothing of anyone. The bird-watching journal she read slowly, a few pages at a time, over the course of several months. Dolores had kept it for 42 years, in 4 different notebooks bound with a rubber band, and the handwriting in the first notebook was firm and young, and the handwriting in the last was looser, a little slower, but no less precise. She had logged 847 individual sightings at Heron Lake alone. She had noted weather conditions, light conditions, the time of day. She had drawn small sketches in the margins, a wing, a foot, an eye. She had written, on the last page of the last notebook, the wood thrush came back to the stand of birch on the north shore. Same pair, I think, or the same hope. Nora read that line 3 times. She thought about the way her godmother had known her without requiring her to explain herself. She thought about the tin in the floor, the accounts accruing quietly, the letters kept in order. She thought about what it meant to love someone by preparing a soft place to land, years before the fall. Some things only show themselves when the time is right. She understood it now. She understood it completely. A life built slowly is not a lesser life. The cabin on Heron Lake did not make Nora Calloway wealthy in any dramatic sense. It made her steady. It gave her mornings with coffee on a porch that faced east, afternoons in a garden that kept its own schedule, evenings with the lake turning gold, and then silver, and then dark. It gave her Ruth's voice at the end of a phone call, Carl's truck in the driveway when something needed attention, Pete's unhurried thoroughness with a nail set. It gave her a town that remembered her godmother and therefore knew, without her having to say so, something true about who she was. She was 31 years old when she arrived. She turned 32 in December, alone in the cabin with the wood stove burning and the snow coming down through the pines. She did not feel alone, particularly she felt, for the first time in a long time, exactly located. Exactly where she was supposed to be. On the dock in the morning, she still steps over the third board without looking down. Her feet know where it is. She thinks they always will. Thank you for spending this evening with us. If this story meant something to you, we'd be grateful if you'd share it with someone who might need to hear it. And we'd love for you to subscribe if you haven't already. And before you go, we'd like to ask you something real. Has someone in your life ever prepared something for you that you didn't understand until much later? A gift? A lesson? A quiet act of love that only made sense in hindsight? Leave us a comment and tell us about it. We'll read every one. We'll see you in the next one.